Wyoming Territory. 1883, the wind howled down off the mountains as the westbound stagecoach rolled into the dusty stop outside the town of Whitford Hollow, its iron wheels grinding to a halt. The only passenger inside sat stiff as a board, her gloved fingers clenched tight around a worn carpetbag on her lap. Odella Granger did not lift her veil right away. She could feel the weight of stares pressing in from the townsfolk gathered nearby, some curious, others disapproving. A dog barked somewhere behind the general store. A boy called out to his sister. Odella stayed still. The moment she stepped down, everything would change again. She'd been a teacher in Indiana until the fire. A boarding house blaze had taken her home, her job, and most of the right side of her face. The scars had healed, but the whispers had not. When her cousin's husband suggested she try for a mail-order match out west, she'd laughed. But here she was. Her veil fluttered as she stepped down from the stage, her boots hitting hard-packed dirt. No one came forward. Not yet. Then a tall man in a slate-colored coat and dusty hat stepped out from beside the livery. Broad shoulders, sun-browned skin, and eyes the color of creek water. He walked like someone who had never rushed a day in his life. "You Odella Granger?" he asked, voice low and steady. She nodded once, lips dry. "Yes." He looked at her face, veil and all, and did not flinch. "I'm Holden Tate. I put in for you." Her heart thudded. He had not sent a proxy. He had written the letters himself. She had not believed it until now. "You sure?" she asked before she could stop herself. Holden's mouth pressed into a line. Then he stepped closer, reached up, and gently lifted her veil. The sun caught the scarred skin along her cheek and jaw. She braced for the recoil. She had seen it too many times, but Holden just nodded. "I am sure." She swallowed hard. "You are not." "Surprised? I knew you had burns. You said so. I figure it makes you honest. That counts for more than pretty skin." Odella blinked, chest tight. Holden turned to pick up her bag. "Come on, wagons this way." They rode in silence for a time. The field stretched wide around them, golden with tall grass. A hawk circled overhead. She watched the curve of his hands on the reins, the quiet steadiness of him. "Do you really want a wife?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Yes. Not just someone to cook and clean. No. I want someone to share the day with, the quiet, the hard parts, all of it." She looked out at the land. "I can do quiet," he smiled, and it was a real smile, not one of pity. "Good." They reached his homestead by late afternoon. A small house with a porch, a barn, a few chickens pecking near the coop. The place looked worn but clean. Lived in. Inside, everything smelled like cedar and old books. He showed her the kitchen, the washroom, and the room he'd cleared out for her until they felt right sharing. "I figured you might want your own space for now," he said. She nodded. "Thank you." That night, she sat by the fire with him, sipping tea while the wind pushed against the walls outside. "You do not ask about the fire," she said quietly. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She studied his profile in the firelight. "I was asleep. A lamp tipped, boarding house caught fast, I got out, 2 others didn't." She stopped, throat thick. He did not rush her, just waited. "I kept thinking the pain would kill me. Then when it didn't, I wished it had. But I am still here." He nodded once. "You are." She looked at him, really looked. "Why me?" Holden set his cup down. "My first wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her and our son. I have been alone since. Not because I stopped needing anyone, but because I stopped hoping. When I read your letter, you did not ask for pity. You just wrote plain. I like that." Odella felt something shift inside, slow and cautious. Not quite trust, not yet, but something close. The days passed. She helped with the hens, sewed curtains, learned to knead bread without burning her hands. He showed her how to saddle a horse, how to hold the reins. They ate together, worked side by side. At night they sat by the fire, and sometimes she read aloud. One evening she came in from gathering eggs and found two children sitting on the porch steps. A boy and a girl, both under 10, covered in dust and fear. Holden stepped past her, kneeling down slowly. "What are your names, Lyle and Laura?" the boy said. "Our pa left us, said he'd be back. He never came." Holden stood. "You hungry?" Both nodded. That night, Odella wrapped them in quilts and watched them sleep on the settee. Holden leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "They came from the Miller place," he said. "Their pa drank hard, always had a mean streak. Looks like he finally ran off for good." Odella looked at the boy's scraped knees and the girl's tangled braids. "We cannot send them away." "No," Holden said, "we cannot." She looked up at him. "Then we raise them." Holden nodded. "If you want to." Odella took a breath. "I do." Later that night, Holden stood by the fireplace as she dried her hands. He cleared his throat. "I know this was not the life you imagined." She turned toward him. "No, but it is the one I have, and I think maybe it is better." He stepped closer, eyes steady on hers. "I want to marry you, Odella, for real. Not just paper and letters. I want this to be a life." She felt the air rush out of her lungs. "You are sure?" He reached up, cupped the unscarred side of her face, then gently traced the edge of the burn with his thumb. His eyes never left hers. "I have never been more sure." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. "Then yes." Holden leaned in, and the kiss was quiet, steady, like everything else he did, but there was warmth in it that made her knees tremble. Outside, the wind carried the scent of sage and pine. Inside, she felt something long buried start to bloom. Hope, real and strong, like the man who had chosen her without flinching. The barn roof leaked. Odella noticed it the third morning after the children arrived, when a slow drip fell across the dirt floor and darkened the shoulder of Holden's shirt as he forked hay into the stalls. He didn't curse or frown, only shifted his stance and kept working, jaw tight. "I can help mend it," she said from the doorway, arms folded beneath her shawl. The air was still cold in the mornings, and her breath curled faintly in front of her. Holden looked over his shoulder. "You ever done roof work?" She shook her head. "No, but I can hand you nails. And I know how to balance." That earned a small lift of his brow. "Long as you're sure." "I am." By midday, they were both on the roof, Holden hammering in careful rhythm while she passed him boards and kept watch on the slope. Her shoes slipped once on the grit-dusted shingles, and his hand shot out fast, steadying her by the waist without hesitation. She felt the heat of his palm through her dress and stayed still until he let go. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them had started to feel companionable, not strained. Below, Laura played with a piece of blue ribbon she'd found in a drawer, tying it around the neck of a straw doll Odella had sewn for her the night before. Lyle sat near the fence line, watching the cattle with a focus that was too quiet for a boy his age. Later, after supper, Odella found herself kneeling beside the boy as he fed scraps to the barn cat. "You don't say much," she said gently. He scratched behind the cat's ears. "Pa said talking made a man weak." She didn't answer right away. The sky above them was deepening into violet, the first stars prickling through. "Your pa was wrong," she said finally. "Quiet can be strong, but so can words when they're true." Lyle looked at her face then, really looked. His eyes didn't dart away like others had. He nodded once, and she saw something loosen in his shoulders. Inside the house, Holden was oiling the hinges on the back door. The wood had started to swell with the spring damp, and the latch stuck. "You always fix things yourself?" she asked as she came in and hung her shawl by the stove. He glanced up. "Most times. I don't like depending on men who take 3 days and do half the work." She sat down at the table, folding her hands. "You ever think about hiring a hand?" "I have. Not many stay. It's quiet out here. Not everyone's built for quiet, she thought about that. I think I am. Holden gave a small nod, then set the oil can aside. I believe you. The next day, she took the children to the creek behind the east pasture. Laura gathered smooth stones, one for each new day she spent with them. Lyle found a frog and named it after the schoolmaster he didn't like back in Cheyenne. Odella waded in with her skirts gathered high, the cold water shocking against her ankles. It reminded her she had a body still, one that could feel and move and heal. She hadn't felt that in years. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she found Holden on the porch, a tin cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The moon was full, casting the yard in pale silver. She sat beside him without asking. I used to dream of the sea, she said after a while. Thought I might see it someday. Now I think I'd rather stay inland where the wind smells like pine and dust. Holden didn't look over. I used to think I'd never want someone in the house again. Then you arrived and it got easier to breathe. She turned her head slowly, studying his profile. You're not a man who says things just to say them. No, then I believe you. He set the cup down. I want to build another room. For what? For the children. They need space. A door to close, a place to grow. She smiled and it came easily. I'll help. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a quiet certainty she was beginning to recognize as his way, he reached over and laced his fingers with hers. They sat like that for a long while, the night stretching soft around them, and for the first time in years, Odella didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She felt like she'd arrived. Spring carried itself slowly into the mountains, and the thaw came in patches, first the muddy ruts along the road, then the sharp green shoots by the chicken coop. Odella stood at the clothesline, pinning up damp shirts that snapped in the breeze, her fingers red from the cold, but steady. Laura's laughter drifted from behind the barn where she and Lyle had found a tortoise shell and were convincing it to be a sled for their dolls. Holden's boots crunched behind her. Fence broke along the west pasture, he said. Elk must have come through last night. I'll need to mend it before the cattle get curious. She nodded, tucking a pin between her lips. Take Lyle with you. He's not ready for barbed wire. He's ready for a task. Holden hesitated, then gave a short nod. I'll show him what to do. He didn't say more, but she saw the way he waited for Lyle to run and fetch his jacket. The boy's steps were quick, shoulders straighter than they'd been a week earlier. By late afternoon, the sun had settled soft over the ridges, and Odella was kneeling in the garden plot, turning the soil with her hands. She found a rusted horseshoe buried under the frost line and set it aside. It felt like a sign, though she didn't believe in omens. Inside, she boiled water for soap making. The kitchen filled with the sharp scent of lye, and she stirred with a long wooden paddle Holden had carved from pine. She'd never made soap before, but the recipe came from a worn paper folded into the back of her mother's Bible. It felt right to try. When the men returned, Lyle's hands were dirty, his cheeks flushed with pride. I tied every wire knot, he said, holding up his fingers. Didn't even prick myself. Holden gave a short glance in Odella's direction. He did good. That evening they ate late. Cornmeal mush with molasses and boiled beans. Laura fell asleep at the table, her mouth still sticky with syrup. Odella carried her to bed, brushing the child's hair from her brow as she tucked the quilt under her chin. When she came back to the front room, Holden was carving again, a length of cedar balanced across his lap. He didn't look up. You're making something, she said. For you. She sat opposite him. What is it? Box. For your sewing things. She watched the shavings curl away from his knife. You remembered. You mentioned needing a place for your thread. Thought I'd give you one. She folded her hands. You remember details. I listen. The fire ticked softly in the stove. Outside, a coyote yipped far off, followed by silence. "I didn't think I'd be useful again," she said, voice low. "After the fire, I stopped seeing myself as capable. I thought I'd always be a burden. You're not. I know that now." He set the knife down. "You do more than your share, Odella, I see it." She met his gaze. "Do you believe people can be remade? I think they're revealed. Like wood under old paint. The truth's there the whole time, you just have to scrape back what life put on top." She breathed in slow. "You see me like that?" "I do." Her throat tightened, but she held his eyes. "I want to marry you soon, not in some distant way. I want to wear your name and sleep in your bed. I want this life with you." Holden didn't speak right away. He set the carving aside and stood. Then he crossed the space between them and knelt before her, resting his hands gently on her knees. "Then let's do it," he said. "There's a preacher rides in every second Sunday. That's 3 days from now. We'll ask him." She nodded. "Yes." He leaned in, and this time when he kissed her, she let herself close her eyes and lean forward, the last distance bridged. Later, when the lamp was low and the wind curled under the eaves, she lay in bed listening to the hush of the house. Lyle's soft snore from the room down the hall, the creak of the porch as Holden stepped outside to check the latch. This wasn't the life she had planned. But it was the one she had found. And it was hers. The sky broke open with rain the morning the preacher arrived. Holden turned Laura's hair into a braid while Odella fetched the brown dress she'd mended just the week before, the one with the faded lace collar and mother of pearl buttons. Her hands didn't shake as she buttoned it. There was steadiness in her now, a rootedness she hadn't possessed when she'd stepped down from the stage weeks ago. They didn't speak much while getting ready. The quiet was gentle, filled with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. Lyle polished Holden's boots without being asked, then waited on the porch, his shirt tucked in, hair combed with water. The preacher, Reverend Coates, a tall man with a deep-set brow, rode in with the rain still falling light, his oilskin slick with droplets. He took his hat off the moment he stepped inside, nodding once at Holden and then at Odella. "Seems you've built something good here," he said, glancing at the way Laura clung to Odella's skirt. "We have," Holden replied. They married in the front room with the fire burning low. Laura held the wildflowers she and Lyle had gathered the day before, now wrapped in a strip of muslin. The preacher spoke plain and clear, and Holden's hand never left Odella's. When it came time to say their vows, Holden looked at her and said, "I will keep you as you are, and as you grow." Odella answered, "I will walk beside you in silence or in storm." Reverend Coates said the words that made it so, and Laura clapped once before remembering herself and folding her hands like a proper witness. Lyle didn't smile, but his eyes held a calm she hadn't seen in him before. That night, after the preacher rode out and the children were asleep, Holden slid his arms around her waist in the darkened kitchen. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the floorboards. "I built something else," he said quietly. She turned in his arms. "What is it?" He stepped back and opened the door to the pantry. Inside, beside the shelves of preserved beans and flour sacks, stood a cradle. Ashwood polished smooth, a quilt folded inside it in soft reds and browns. Her breath caught. "I didn't want to wait until it became a need," he said. "I just wanted it to be ready in case." She stared at the cradle, then back at him. "You hope for more." "I do." She stepped forward and touched the edge of the wood. "So do I." In the weeks that followed, the land softened. Snowmelt swelled the creek, and small white blossoms appeared along the fence posts near the east field. Odella planted rows of carrots and peas, showing Laura how to space the seeds with her thumb and forefinger. Lyle helped Holden build a new chicken pen, and by the 3rd week of May, 2 hens had gone broody. One evening, as Holden repaired the porch rail, Odella sat beside him, smoothing wax into the wood of the sewing box he'd finished carving. "You ever miss your first family?" she asked. His hand stilled. "Every day," she nodded. "I think about the girls who didn't make it out of the fire. I carry them still, not in guilt, just in memory." He met her gaze. "That's what we do. We carry who we've lost, and we build something new beside that weight." She reached for his hand. "I want to teach again, not in a schoolhouse, but here. Lyle's letters are crooked and Laura counts by skipping sevens. They'll learn easy with you. I've written for slates and chalk. They're not cheap. I'll ride to Cheyenne next week. I'll bring back what you need." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "There's a strength in building, Holden. Not everyone sees that. You do." They finished the porch rail together. She held the boards while he drove the nails, and when they stood back to look at the finished work, it felt like more than lumber and labor. It felt like a promise. Inside, Lyle practiced his letters by candlelight, and Laura hummed as she stitched two pieces of cloth together, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Odella sat in the doorway, listening to the sounds of home, the creak of the rocker, Holden's steady breathing, the rustle of pages as Lyle turned his primer. She had come to Wyoming expecting to survive. Instead, she had been chosen. And in return, she had chosen this life, this man, this long, quiet strength that grew between them without being named. And now, as Holden set down his work and reached for her hand, she knew they had begun something real, something lasting. By early summer, the land had thickened with life. The creek ran clear and full beneath the cottonwoods, and the sky no longer carried that brittle edge it had in March. Odella rose early now, not from habit or worry, but because she liked the quiet before the household stirred, the way the light slanted over the table, the hush before Laura's feet pattered down the hallway. Holden was already outside when she stepped onto the porch. His shirt was damp at the back from splitting wood, the axe sunk deep into a round he'd just halved. She didn't interrupt. He worked with a kind of presence that asked for space, and she liked watching him in it. He straightened and wiped the sweat from his brow. "There's a letter for you," he said. "Came in with the trade wagon. I left it on the kitchen table." She found it beside the tin of flour, the envelope creased but clean. The handwriting was narrow and precise. She read it once, then again, her hands going still. "It's from the school board in Laramie," she said after supper, when the children were outside turning cartwheels in the tall grass. "They're opening a station school near Fort Sanders. Asked if I'd consider a position." Holden looked up from oiling the hinges on the cellar door. "You thinking about it?" "I was for a moment, but I'm not going." He set the cloth down. "Why not?" She crossed the room slowly and leaned a hip against the work table. "Because I already have students, and because I don't want to leave this house." "Or you." Holden's gaze held hers, steady and sure. "You don't have to explain yourself. I know. But I want to." Later that week, she assembled a school corner in the front room, a small desk for the children, a slate board propped upright against the wall, and a row of hand-stitched letters above it, each cut from linen and inked by hand. Laura practiced penmanship with careful strokes, her tongue caught at the corner of her mouth. Lyle read aloud from a borrowed reader, his voice gaining confidence with each page. Holden watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. "You've got a way with them. They want to learn. That's half the work. They trust you. That's the rest." She didn't answer, but her smile answered for her. One morning, Odella caught sight of Holden standing alone near the edge of the pasture, his hand resting against the top rail. She walked to him without asking what troubled him. He spoke first. "I visited my wife's grave last fall, brought her the last apple from the tree we planted." Odella waited. "I told her I'd probably never stop missing her, but I told her I'd make room for someone else, and I have." She slipped her hand into his. "I'm not afraid of her memory." "I think she'd be glad you're not alone," he nodded slowly. "So do I." By July, the barn roof held tight through 2 heavy storms, and the hens had hatched 5 chicks. The children named them after cattlemen from town. Laura followed the smallest one around the yard with a scrap of butter biscuit, convinced it would follow her into the house if she was patient enough. One evening, Holden returned from town with a wrapped parcel beneath his arm. He handed it to Odella without ceremony. Inside was a bolt of soft blue calico and a pair of leather gloves sized for her hands. "I saw them and thought they'd suit you," he said. "For riding, if you ever want to join me when I check the far field." She ran her fingers along the fabric. "I do want to. Then we'll go tomorrow." The ride was quiet, save for the breeze in the grasses and the creak of saddle leather. They didn't rush. At the ridge, they dismounted and looked out over the valley fields silvered with wheat, the creek winding below like a thread of glass. Holden took her hand and didn't let go. "I've never had this," she said softly. "A place that felt like mine, a man who didn't look away. You have both now." They returned to the house with the sun dipping low behind them. Lyle met them at the barn, holding up a folded paper. "I wrote a story," he said, eyes bright. "It's about a man and a woman who find a house that fixes all the broken things." Odella took the paper from him, already blinking back tears. She hugged him with one arm, holding tight. That night, with the children asleep and the windows open to the warm air, Odella sat beside Holden on the porch swing he'd built the week before. The night was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves. "I want to have a child with you," she said. He turned toward her. "You're certain?" She nodded. "Yes." His hand settled over hers, rough and warm. "Then we will." She leaned her head on his shoulder and they rocked slowly, the boards beneath them groaning softly with each pass. The moon was high and the night smelled of clover and cut hay. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. Years passed. The children stayed. Lyle grew into a tall, quiet boy with strong shoulders and a steady hand. Laura never stopped talking, but she learned to listen too. Odella taught local children at a long table in the barn during the summer months, and in the colder seasons, she taught by the fire, her lessons stitched into the rhythm of the days. Their own child came in the second spring, a girl with Holden's eyes and Odella's calm. They named her Mercy, for what the world had finally given them. Holden built a second cradle. Odella planted a lilac bush beside the porch. Every year it bloomed bigger. Their love never dimmed, but grew into something deeper than youth, a bond shaped by the years they weathered together, by the quiet trust they'd built with slow, steady hands. And in that valley, beneath the mountains and the sky that once felt too wide, they lived just as they had promised, side by side, in silence or in storm, through every season that followed, together. Always.